A homeless boy slapped a billionaire to save his life. No one on the busy city street understood what they were about to witness. The afternoon traffic crawled forward beneath tall glass buildings, horns murmuring like distant thunder. Expensive cars lined the road, sunlight flashing off polished hoods. Among them stood a silver luxury sedan, its engine idling, its owner momentarily distracted by a phone call that would have changed everything if it had continued for even a few seconds longer. The billionaire, an elderly man with neatly combed white hair, a clean-shaven face, and a dignified posture, leaned casually against the front of his car. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue blazer over a crisp white shirt, the kind of outfit that announced power without needing words. His expression was calm, confident, unaware of the danger silently approaching from behind. On the other side of the street stood a homeless boy, no more than 10 years old. His clothes were worn and dusty, his jeans faded at the knees, his shirt stretched thin from time and hardship. A large plastic bag filled with collected scraps and recyclables was slung over his shoulder, nearly as big as he was. His blonde hair was messy, his face smudged with dirt, but his eyes were sharp, alert, focused. The street did not return to normal. Not immediately. People stood frozen, staring at the twisted metal, the shattered glass, the stunned billionaire, and the small boy with the oversized bag hanging from his shoulder. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, growing louder by the second, but for a moment, time itself seemed suspended. The billionaire's breathing was shallow and uneven. His heart hammered violently against his ribs as if it was trying to escape. He stared at the ruined front of his silver car, at the place where his body should have been. One step closer, and he would have been gone. He swallowed hard and looked back at the boy. The child stood stiffly, shoulders hunched, eyes lowered now. The bravery that had driven him seconds earlier was already being replaced by caution. Experience had taught him a painful truth. Adults with power were rarely grateful to children like him. The billionaire cleared his throat. What did you just do?" he asked, his voice hoarse, not an angry shaken. The boy flinched slightly at the sound, then lifted his eyes. They were wide, serious, far older than his years. "You weren't moving," the boy said quietly. The truck didn't stop. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "He saved him. That kid's a hero. He could have been killed himself." The billionaire glanced toward the truck now stopped down the street, steam hissing from its hood. The driver stood beside it, pale and trembling, hands gripping his head. Reality crashed down all at once. The billionaire's legs gave out. He sank onto the curb. One hand braced against the pavement, the other pressed to his chest. His expensive blazer was smeared with dust. His polished image shattered as completely as the car beside him. A woman rushed forward. "Sir, are you hurt?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I think I'm alive." His gaze drifted back to the boy, who had taken a hesitant step backward, already preparing to disappear. The plastic bag rustled as he shifted his weight, instinctively calculating escape routes. "Wait," the billionaire said suddenly. The boy stopped, for a moment. Neither moved. Then the billionaire stood up, straightening himself with effort. He walked toward the child, not too fast, not too close, aware of how intimidating he must seem. His voice softened. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated. Giving your name meant being remembered. Remembered sometimes meant trouble. "Eli," he said finally. "Eli," the billionaire repeated, tasting the name as if it mattered. "You saved my life." Eli shrugged, eyes flicking toward the crowd. "Didn't want you to get hit." "That slap," the billionaire said, touching his cheek again, "was the best thing that's ever happened to me." A few people chuckled nervously. Others wiped their eyes. Before Eli could respond, 2 police officers pushed through the crowd, followed closely by paramedics. Questions came fast and loud. "What happened here? Is anyone injured? Who saw the collision? The billionaire raised a hand. I did, he said firmly. And this boy, he placed a gentle hand on Eli's shoulder, making the child stiffen slightly, is the reason I'm still standing. One officer looked down at Eli, then at the bag. His expression hardened just a little. Son, did you hit this man? Eli's fingers tightened around the strap. Yes, he admitted. The officer's brow furrowed. Why? The billionaire stepped forward immediately. Because I was about to die. And because he was brave enough to stop it. The officer hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right. We'll get statements. As the paramedics checked the billionaire's vitals, Eli stood awkwardly at the edge of the scene. No one was yelling at him. No one was grabbing him. That alone felt strange. A woman from the crowd crouched beside him. You're very brave, she said gently. Eli didn't answer. He watched the billionaire instead. The man's hands still shook slightly. His face, so confident moments earlier now, carried something new. Fear, gratitude, and something else. Eli recognized all too well. Loneliness. After the authorities finished their questions, the crowd slowly dispersed. The damaged car was towed away. The truck driver was escorted aside. Life resumed, as it always did. But for the billionaire and the boy, nothing felt the same. The billionaire approached Eli one more time. Where are your parents? He asked softly. Eli shook his head. Just me. The words hit harder than any slap. The billionaire nodded slowly. I owe you my life, he said. And I don't believe in coincidences. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek business card, and held it out. My name is Richard Hawley, he said. And I'd like to help you. Eli stared at the card, then up at the man's face. He had heard promises before. Most vanished as quickly as they appeared. I don't need money, Eli said quietly. Richard blinked. Then what do you need? Eli thought for a long moment. Finally he said, a chance. Richard Hawley inhaled deeply. And in that moment, the billionaire who had built empires, crushed competitors, and controlled markets realized he was standing at the beginning of the most important decision of his life, because the boy who had slapped him to save his life was about to change it forever. Asterisk. Richard Hawley had walked away from burning boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and courtroom battles without so much as a pause in his step. But walking away from Eli proved far harder. The boy stood on the sidewalk clutching the business card like it might vanish if he loosened his grip. His oversized bag hung heavy against his back. The thin plastic stretched tight with everything he owned. He looked small beneath the towering buildings, swallowed by a city that barely noticed him. Richard turned back after 3 steps. Come with me, he said. Eli froze. Where? Somewhere safe, Richard replied. Somewhere warm. Suspicion flickered across the boy's face. Life had taught him caution far earlier than it should have. For how long? The boy wasn't looking at the cars. He was looking at the billionaire. More specifically, at the faint shimmer of danger the man couldn't see. The traffic light above flickered yellow. A delivery truck at the far end of the street failed to slow down. Boy's heart pounded. He had learned to read danger long before most children learn to read books. Life on the streets had sharpened his instincts. He saw the angle of the truck, the speed, the distraction, the exact moment when metal would meet flesh. Hey! The boy shouted, his voice cracking through the noise of the city. The billionaire didn't hear him. The truck surged forward. People nearby froze, confused, their brains lagging behind the unfolding disaster. Someone screamed. Someone else dropped a phone. But no one moved fast enough. No one except the boy. He ran. His shoes slapped against the pavement as he sprinted toward the car. The plastic bag bounced wildly against his back. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He only knew one thing: if the man didn't move now, He would die. The billionaire turned slightly, irritation flickering across his face as he noticed movement in his peripheral vision, and then the boy reached him and slapped him hard across the face. The sound cracked through the air. Gasps erupted from the sidewalk. The billionaire staggered backward in shock, eyes wide, breath stolen not by pain, but by disbelief. His heel caught on the curb, and he stumbled away from the front of the car. At that exact moment, the delivery truck barreled past, missing him by less than a second, smashing into the space where he had been standing. Metal screamed. Glass exploded. The silver sedan crumpled like paper. Silence followed. The billionaire stood frozen, heart pounding, staring at the wreckage inches from where his life had almost ended. His face drained of color. His phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the asphalt. Slowly, he turned back toward the boy. The child stood there, chest heaving, one small hand clenched into a fist, the other still gripping the strap of his bag. Fear flickered across his face, not fear of what had happened, but fear of what might happen next. People rushed forward, voices overlapping. Did that kid just... He hit him. That car, oh my God. He saved him. The billionaire touched his cheek, then looked at the crushed hood of his car. Then back at the boy. His knees felt weak. For the first time in years, the man who owned companies, towers, and fortunes beyond imagination realized something terrifyingly simple. He was alive only because a homeless child had dared to hurt him, and this was only the beginning. Richard hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Then he answered honestly, "As long as you need." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of traffic. Finally, Eli nodded once. Not because he trusted Richard completely, but because something deep inside him said this moment mattered. They rode in a different car this time, a black sedan sent by Richard's security team. Eli sat stiffly in the back seat, hands folded in his lap, eyes darting to every window and mirror. He had never been inside a car this quiet, this clean. Richard watched him from across the seat, noticing every detail. The dirt beneath the boy's fingernails, the worn knees of his jeans, the way his shoulders stayed tense as if expecting the ride to end badly. "You don't have to be afraid," Richard said. Eli didn't look at him. "I'm not." But his clenched jaw said otherwise. The car pulled up to a towering glass building overlooking the city. Lights glowed softly inside, reflecting wealth so casually it felt unreal. Eli stared upward, his neck craning back. "This is where you live?" he asked. Richard nodded. "One of the places." Inside, the air smelled clean and faintly of cedar. Marble floors reflected their footsteps. A doorman greeted Richard by name, and then paused when he noticed Eli. Richard met his gaze. "He's with me." That single sentence changed everything. An elevator whisked them upward in silence. When the doors opened, Eli stepped into a space so large he thought he'd walked into a museum. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city spread out below like a map of lights. Soft furniture sat untouched, as if waiting for people who never stayed long enough to use it. Eli whispered, "It's quiet." "Yes," Richard said. "Too quiet most days." He led Eli to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water. Eli drank his in one gulp, then froze as if embarrassed. "Sorry." "Don't be," Richard said gently. "You're home for tonight." The word home lingered in the air. Later, Eli sat on the edge of a guest bed, staring at crisp white sheets. He had slept on cardboard, in shelters, under bridges, but never here. He didn't dare lie down fully, afraid he'd ruin something. Richard knocked softly and stepped in. "I had someone bring clothes your size," he said, gesturing to the neatly folded stack. "And food will be ready soon." Eli nodded. "Thank you." Richard paused at the door. "Eli, why were you really standing in front of my car today?" The boy looked down at his hands. "Because," he said slowly. People like you never look down. Richard felt the weight of those words settle heavily on his chest. That night, after Eli finally fell asleep, Richard stood alone by the window. The city lights reflected in his eyes as memories he had buried long ago began to resurface, memories of being ignored, of being small, of being invisible. He realized something terrifying and profound. If Eli hadn't slapped him, if Eli hadn't dared to interfere, Richard Hawley would not only be dead physically, he would have stayed dead inside, and for the first time in decades, the billionaire felt something he couldn't buy, control, or calculate. A responsibility, asterisk. Richard did not sleep that night. The city outside his penthouse pulsed with life cars whispering along wet streets. Distant sirens rising and falling, but inside, everything felt unbearably still. He sat alone in his private study, the room where billion-dollar decisions were usually made in minutes, staring at the dark glass wall that reflected his own face back at him. For the first time in years, the reflection unsettled him. He looked powerful, polished, in control. And yet, beneath that surface, something old and forgotten was stirring. Eli's voice echoed in his head. Not loud, not angry, just painfully honest. You weren't listening. People like you never look down. Richard had built his empire on the belief that he did look down, at numbers, at forecasts, at market risks. But now he understood what the boy meant. He had looked over people, past them, but rarely at them, especially not the ones who lived where the sidewalks cracked and hope was measured in hours. Not years. He poured himself a drink, then didn't touch it. Instead, he rubbed his temples, memories surfacing uninvited. His first company, his first failure, the nights when hunger had been closer than success. Somewhere along the way, he had buried that version of himself under layers of wealth and distance. Buried that version of that version of himself under layers of wealth and distance. Soft sound pulled him from his thoughts. Footsteps. Richard turned to see Eli standing hesitantly in the doorway, already dressed though the sun had barely risen. The boy's hair was neatly combed, his hands clasped together as if unsure where they belonged in a place like this. I couldn't sleep, Eli said quietly. Richard nodded slowly. Neither could I. They sat at the massive dining table, sunlight creeping in through tall windows, painting gold across polished wood and untouched plates of food. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy, full of things neither quite knew how to say. Eli traced a faint scratch on the table with his finger. Am I in trouble? He asked suddenly. Richard looked at him sharply. Why would you think that? People usually don't let me stay long, Eli said. They help. Then they get tired. The words hit harder than any insult ever had. No, Richard said firmly. You're not in trouble. Eli studied his face, searching for certainty. Then why am I here? Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth surprised him. Because you didn't look away, he said finally. And because neither can I anymore. After breakfast, Richard made a decision that felt impulsive, almost reckless by his standards. Come with me, he said, reaching for his jacket. Where? Where you come from, Richard replied. I want to see it. They didn't take the armored car. Richard dismissed security, ignoring the protests over the phone. Instead, they drove in a plain sedan, Eli sitting beside him instead of across a tinted divider. The city shifted as they moved. Towers of glass gave way to older buildings. Sidewalks narrowed. Streetlights flickered. Eli pointed things out quietly, not with bitterness, just familiarity. That store throws food out late. You have to come right after closing. That bench is warm in winter because of the subway vent. That alley. That's where people don't ask questions. Richard listened in silence, every word carving something new into him. They stopped in front of a tired building with peeling paint and boarded windows. My mom cleaned offices here, Eli said. Did? Richard repeated gently. Eli nodded. At night, I waited outside so she wouldn't be alone. She said light looks different when you know someone's waiting. Richard swallowed hard. What happened to her? Eli took a breath. She got sick. The bills came fast. Faster than help. He shrugged, too practiced at loss for someone so young. Then she was gone. No tears, no drama. Just facts. Richard felt something twist deep in his chest. He thought of the hospitals he funded, the charities with his name on the walls, and wondered how many Eli-shaped gaps still existed between them. She taught me to watch people, Eli added. She said you can tell who someone is when they think nobody's important. On the drive back, Richard said little. His world felt different now, rearranged by streets he'd never bothered to see. Back at the penthouse, the change in him became visible. He started asking staff their names and remembering them. He waited when people spoke. He listened without interrupting. And most surprisingly, he began asking Eli questions, not tests. Not lectures. Real questions. What would you do differently? What scares you? What do you think matters? Eli answered honestly. Sometimes awkwardly. Sometimes with wisdom that didn't match his age. He never asked for money. Never asked for gifts. When Richard offered something, Eli asked instead, who else could use it? One afternoon, a call came from the board. There's concern, his assistant said carefully. About the boy. What kind of concern? Richard asked, already knowing. They think he's inappropriate. A distraction. Richard stared out the window, watching Eli in the distance. Carefully arranging books he couldn't read by sight alone. Running his fingers over raised letters. He's not a distraction, Richard said quietly. He's a reminder. The line went silent. That evening, Richard sat beside Eli. There will be people who won't like you being here, Richard said. Eli looked up calm. Do you? Richard knelt down, lowering himself until they were eye to eye. A gesture that felt more powerful than standing tall ever had. No, he said. I don't. Eli smiled, then not wide, not triumphant, just relieved. That night, as the city slept, Richard realized the truth he could no longer avoid. This wasn't charity. This wasn't guilt. This was transformation. And transformation always demanded a cost. What Richard didn't yet know was that the world was already watching, and the next step would force him to choose between the empire he built and the humanity he was finally reclaiming. The first sign of trouble came quietly. A headline, small, almost forgettable, appeared on a local blog late one evening. Billionaire spotted with homeless child after downtown accident. No accusations. No outrage. Just a photo taken from across the street. Richard Holly standing beside a boy with a plastic bag slung over his shoulder. By morning, it was everywhere. From an outsider narrator's view. This was the moment the private story stopped being private. What had begun as a split-second act of courage on a crowded street was now being dragged into a world that thrived on speculation. Richard watched the news unfold from his office. The screens flickering with commentary. Some are calling it generosity. Others are asking serious questions. Was the boy exploited for good press? Is this a publicity move? Richard turned the volume down. Across the room, Eli sat quietly on a couch, flipping through a book someone had given him, one he didn't fully understand yet, but wanted to. He hadn't seen the news. No one had shown him, and Richard hadn't decided whether to. The board meeting was called before noon. The men and women seated around the long table had known Richard for decades. They trusted his instincts, his ruthlessness, his ability to protect the company at all costs. But today, something was different. This situation is unstable, one board member said carefully. Public perception is already shifting. Toward what? Richard asked calmly. Toward uncertainty, another replied. And uncertainty affects markets. Richard folded his hands. A child saved my life. Yes, the man said quickly. And that's admirable. But bringing him into your personal residence is not a crime. Richard interrupted. No, the woman across from him said. But it can be framed as one. That word hung in the air. Framed. Richard leaned back, studying their faces. He saw concern, but not for Eli. Concern for stock prices. For headlines. For control. What exactly are you asking me to do? Richard said. A pause. Then the answer came. Create distance, the chairman said. Quietly, respectfully, arrange placement. A shelter. A program. Something appropriate. Richard understood what they meant. Remove the boy. Turn a living human being into a solved problem. I won't. Richard said simply. Silence followed. This company employs over 50,000 people, the chairman said. Your personal decisions affect all of them. Richard nodded. And so does the kind of man leading it. Later that afternoon, the questions became louder. Reporters waited outside the building. Social media filled with opinions from people who had never met either of them. Some called Richard a hero. Some called him reckless. Some questioned Eli's past, his motives, his worth. Eli felt the shift before anyone explained it. People stopped smiling at him the same way. Security hovered more closely. Conversations paused when he entered rooms. That evening, he approached Richard hesitantly. Did I do something wrong? Eli asked. The question cut deeper than any headline. No, Richard said immediately. You didn't. But people are angry, Eli said. They always get angry before they leave. Richard closed his eyes briefly. They're not angry at you, he said. They're afraid of what you represent. What's that? Richard met his gaze. Change. That night, Richard made another decision, one far more dangerous than inviting Eli into his home. He went public. Not with a press conference. Not with a carefully filtered interview. He released a single statement. A child saved my life. I didn't rescue him. He reminded me who I was before I stopped paying attention. No explanations. No justifications. The reaction was immediate. Support poured in. So did criticism. Sponsors called. Partners hesitated. One major investor quietly withdrew. The cost of change had arrived. Eli watched the fallout from a distance, guilt settling heavy in his chest. He packed his bag that night quietly, efficiently. When Richard found him by the door, the boy didn't look up. I think I should go, Eli said. Why? Richard asked, though he already knew. Because things were easier before me, Eli replied. And you don't deserve problems. Richard knelt in front of him, placing a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. Eli, he said firmly, you didn't cause this. You revealed it. The boy's eyes filled not with tears, but with conflict. What if I make everything worse? He whispered. Richard didn't answer right away. From the narrator's view, this was the moment that mattered more than the accident. More than the slap, more than the headlines. Because Richard finally understood the choice in front of him. Protect the empire he had built. Or protect the truth that had found him. I won't send you away to make my life quieter, Richard said. I won't teach you that honesty is a burden. Eli's shoulders trembled. Then stay, Richard said. Not because you saved me, but because you belong here as much as anyone. Outside, cameras flashed. Inside, a boy who had spent his life preparing to leave finally unpacked his bag, and the world watching closely now had no idea what was coming next, because the final choice, the one that would shock everyone, had not yet been made. Asterisk from an outsider's view. The city expected one of two endings. Either the billionaire would quietly step back, restore order, and let the story fade into another short-lived headline, or he would double down, turn the moment into a polished charity campaign. and move on unchanged beneath a new coat of praise. What no one expected was a third path. The morning after Eli unpacked his bag, Richard Holley walked into the company headquarters without security flanking him. No tailored press moment. No statement prepared by lawyers, just a man who had finally decided to stop hiding behind systems he once controlled. Employees noticed immediately. Whispers followed him down the corridor. "That's him. The boy is still with him. Is this about the accident?" Richard entered the main conference hall where the entire executive leadership had been summoned. Screens were already live, broadcasting to regional offices around the world. This time, he didn't sit. He stood at the head of the room and spoke without notes. "I built this company by rewarding speed, obedience, and results," Richard began. "And somewhere along the way, I stopped rewarding courage." The room was still. "I am alive because a child won with no title, no protection, and nothing to gain," acted when everyone else froze. Some executives shifted uncomfortably. "Yesterday, I was advised to remove that child from my life for the sake of stability," Richard continued. "Today, I'm doing the opposite." He paused. "I'm restructuring this company." That was the moment the air changed. "Effective immediately," Richard said. "Our labor contracts, internal reporting systems, and social responsibility programs will be audited not by consultants, but by people who live under their consequences." Murmurs spread. "And yes," he added calmly, "that includes voices like Eli's." From the outside, it looked like madness. Stock markets reacted sharply. Shares dipped. Analysts called it reckless. Headlines shifted tone again. "Billionaire risks empire for idealism. Emotional decision or moral awakening." Eli watched all of this unfold from a quiet room nearby, unable to fully grasp how a single moment on a crowded street had led here. "I never meant for this," he said softly when Richard checked on him. "I know," Richard replied. "That's why it matters." The backlash came quickly. A senior partner resigned publicly. A lawsuit was threatened. Old interviews resurfaced, painting Richard as a man who had once believed compassion was inefficient. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Late one evening, Richard sat alone in his office, city lights stretching endlessly below. For the first time in years, he wasn't calculating outcomes. He was remembering his own childhood. The days when no one listened. The moments when he wished someone had stepped in the way Eli had. The next morning, Richard made his final move. He transferred controlling interest of the company into a newly formed trust, one that tied executive compensation directly to employee welfare metrics, transparency audits, and community accountability. It was irreversible. Wall Street reacted violently, but something else happened. Too. Employees, thousands of them, started speaking up. Stories surfaced. Quiet injustices corrected. Departments changed not because they were forced to, but because someone had finally shown them what courage looked like. And Eli? Eli didn't become a symbol. He went to school. He learned to read properly. He asked questions. He laughed more. When reporters eventually asked Richard if the boy had saved him, Richard shook his head. "No," he said. "He reminded me that power means nothing if it's never interrupted by humanity." Years later, people would still debate that day. Some would say Richard lost billions. Others would say he gained a legacy. But from the narrator's distance, one truth stands above the noise. A boy once struck a man to save his life, and in doing so, forced a world built on indifference to finally pay attention, not because of wealth, not because of influence, but because one person chose to act and another chose to listen.